The Tick, a blue-garbed superhero who defends the city against bad guys and stuff. Originally starting off as a comic book, The Tick became enough of a thing to garner a much-beloved animated series on Fox Kids, a short-lived live-action show on Fox, and a more recent series set to launch on Amazon Prime in August. And that's pretty much my extent of knowledge on The Tick. Oh, that and the video game too, can't forget that. I remember playing the Super Nintendo version of the game some 20 years ago when a buddy of mine rented a copy of this from the video store. We never got very far in it, not because the game was hard or anything, but rather because after an hour of going through stages, fighting nothing but ninjas and tiptoeing rooftops in hopes of not falling off to avoid some random alley fight, we got bored, we gave up, and promptly returned the game on the same day. The video store clerk, kind soul that he was and able to feel our pain somewhat, allowed us to rent another game for free, and that ended up being Dracula X on the Super Nintendo, a substantial upgrade as far as we were concerned. Since that time, I've never really touched a Tick video game in any way, shape, or form. That is until somewhat recently, when I picked up a copy of The Tick for the Sega Genesis. It was cheap, that's my only excuse. Released in 1994 courtesy of Fox Interactive and based on the highly popular animated series of the time with dabblings of the original comic book thrown in for good measure, The Tick places you in control of, well, the Tick. You basically fight through numerous waves of the same enemy wearing different colors or slightly different tints through drab-looking levels. The Tick can punch, the Tick can kick, he can jump kick, and not much else. The Tick is a fairly simplistic and straightforward superhero with very little in terms of attack variation, and that's not the most exciting thing ever. But at times, he can collect pickups that will restore some health or summon another hero to fight alongside back-to-back for a short period of time. And should he really need it, the Tick can call upon his trusted sidekick Arthur to swoop in and clear the screen of enemies. Be mindful, for you can only use this a number of times before it becomes exhausted and stuff. Sometimes you'll find a box or a garbage can to toss at enemies, other times you'll be on rooftops dodging things, but for the most part, it's just meh. Alright, The Tick is a side-scrolling beat-em-up. You move to the right, you stop to fight some bad guys, you lather, rinse, and repeat. Side-scrolling beat-em-ups, by their very nature, are repetitive affairs. There's not much to them. However, the memorable ones usually have some element to it that makes it entertaining or at least endurable. Maybe it's a multiplayer aspect, maybe it's the multiple characters, gameplay quirks, presentation, the little things that makes the better beat-em-ups memorable, worthwhile, and most importantly, fun to play. The Tick has none of these elements. It's just drawn-out tedium whose sole purpose is to have you waste as much time as humanly possible by tossing you endless wave after endless wave of enemies. And it truly does feel endless because of the pacing. You move along a level and are stopped by a wave of enemies, and just when you clear away the final target and it seems like you're ready to move on, another wave quickly takes its place. One segment can have this happen twice, possibly even thrice, and you'd have to clear these waves in order to earn the right to move onwards for a couple steps before being stopped by another wave of endless enemies. The worst part about this monotony is that it just seems about endless, and there's a very good reason for that. See, The Tick aims to provide as much quote-unquote content as possible by giving you a shitload of padding throughout the game's multiple levels. There are many chapters in the game, each spanning multiple levels, and within those levels, many waves of enemies, sometimes in just one section alone. Now that might seem like a good thing if the gameplay was fun or engaging, but fuck that. To save myself the effort of trying to sell you hyperbole, go onto YouTube or wherever and look up long plays of The Tick, and you'll find videos that are close to 3 hours long. And each of these hours are segmented. You have an hour of fighting ninjas, you have an hour of fighting idea men, and then you have the last hour of the game fighting aliens. Roughly 3 fucking hours of the same boring ass shit, and while the game does offer limited continues, there's nothing in terms of passwords or battery backup saves to help resume the tedium. And so I gave up after 2 hours of gameplay. Just set the controller down, turned off the Genesis, and went outside for a walk. Nothing was going to be gained with further playing of what was an incredibly mind-numbing game. What was left to look forward to? A couple gimmicky bosses, reskinned grunts to fight for the final stretch of the game? No thanks, man. Maybe if this game had a password or a battery save feature or god forbid a level select cheat, it might be worth revisiting somewhere down the line, but the Tick doesn't have any of that stuff in here. It's an endurance test that few people will have the patience to go through in one sitting, and I could happily say with a clear conscience that I'm not one of those people. Now, if there is one thing that I could honestly praise here, it's the graphics. The title screen looks decent, the roll call of characters with the spotlight is a nice touch. The brief intermissions with the chapters and the subplots feature some well-drawn artwork, possibly taken from some pre-existing material, but still pretty decent. And then you have the in-game stuff, and this looks pretty decent in all honesty. The Tick is a big, muscular looking fellow. The various side characters and enemies look fairly decent at best and somewhat bland at worst. The animation's relatively smooth with few hiccups. Not fluid, but it's fine nonetheless. There's never a point where the action slows to a crawl considerably, which is an added bonus considering how slow this game is to begin with. And the level layouts are actually clean looking. The Tick, in all honesty, is a good looking game. It's just unfortunate that it's not much of a game. In regards to sound, the Tick is, well, weak. The music in particular isn't that great sounding, though I recall it sounding a bit better on the Super Nintendo when I played that version many moons ago. And while I'll admit my familiarity of the Tick cartoon is somewhat lacking, I was able to recognize the main theme in here, and it's a fairly respectable recreation. Hell, even the chapter openings seemed like something out of the show, but for the most part, the tunes are repetitive drivel, and it doesn't help that the overall quality of the tunes are simply inadequate. The Sega Genesis, the Mega Drive, can produce good quality music. It's been featured in a whole bunch of games, and this is not one of them. And as far as the sound effects go, they're just there, and let's just leave it at that, shall we? Overall, the Tick on Sega Genesis is boring, drawn-out drivel. It's repetitive, it's soulless, it kills fun, there's no charm to it, and despite some effort to include some varied Tick stuff, I wish they had done more to vary the gameplay, or at least make it not shit. You know, anything to justify 3 hours of your life wasted on something so putrid. Regardless of whether you're a fan of anything Tick or not, there is no reason whatsoever for you to be playing this game in any capacity whatsoever. It is both literally and figuratively an absolute waste of time. And the real kicker is that when you beat the game, you don't get any semblance of a proper ending, but rather this game over screen, which, by the way, is the same screen you get when you lose all your lives and your game ends. So, screw it. Don't bother.